On a lit stage, a 90-year-old woman raises her arms and begins to dance. The audience holds its breath. Every movement is small, deliberate, and impossibly brave. It is not spectacle. It is testimony. It is life answering death in the only language that death cannot mimic. Her name is Éva Fahidi. Before she stepped onto this stage, she stepped off a cattle car. Before she learned the choreography, she learned to count the missing. She lost her entire family in a single day, survived on hunger and silence for decades, and when nearly no one was left to speak, she turned memory into motion and pain into art. This is not a story about how suffering makes you stronger. It is a story about how remembering keeps you human. Tonight, you will follow a girl taken from her home in 1944 who almost 70 years later chose to dance so that forgetting would never win. Éva was born in 1925 in the Hungarian city of Debrecen. Her family was Jewish and firmly rooted in the city's cultural rhythm. A father who worked hard and believed in education, a mother who guarded the warmth of home, and a little sister who followed Éva through rooms filled with books and music. They were not wealthy in the way newspapers admire, but they were rich in the things families count. Saturday meals, nicknames that only make sense at a certain kitchen table, and dreams that feel as ordinary as breathing. Éva wanted languages, stages, trains to other countries, not to run away from life, but to meet more of it. History had a different itinerary. In 1944, Hungary was occupied by Nazi Germany. Rules hardened, neighbors changed their tone, and the map of where you could go, even where you could stand, shrank overnight. What was once a city became a set of instructions. What was once a home became a target. The roundup did not feel like the beginning of a journey. It felt like the end of one. Éva, only 18, was pushed with her parents and her sister into a cattle car meant for animals, not names. The air was a wall. The floor moved when people fainted. Someone tried to pray. Someone else tried to sing. Most people tried not to collapse. The doors stayed shut. When the doors finally slid open, they did not open to a place. They opened to a system. Auschwitz-Birkenau. Smoke you could taste. Barking you could feel in your ribs. Lines that looked like order but led to oblivion. On the ramp, life and death were a gesture. A hand left, a hand right. You in this line, you in that. Éva's parents and her little sister were directed away from her, toward the chimneys, toward the lie of showers, toward the industrialized murder that the world still struggles to name. There was no farewell, no last hug, no final sentence to memorize for the rest of your life. There was only a glance, and then the glance was gone. Éva was marched in the other direction. Her hair was cut. A number was assigned where a name had been. Clothes became rags. Privacy became a memory. Sleep became a rumor. In a place designed to erase the individual, the first thing to disappear is your reflection. But Éva learned a new rule. As long as you could count your breaths, the number on your arm did not get the last word. After a short time in Auschwitz, Éva was sent deeper into the machine. Forced labor in Germany. Her assignments changed with the needs of the war, but not with concern for the workers. She carried heavy materials until her arms shook, cleaned debris in freezing air, labored on minimal rations, and learned how to think past pain. One step, then another, then another. The work had its own grammar. Don't draw attention. Share a crust when you can. Learn which guard looks away and which one never does. Save a little energy for the moment you might need to save your life. Some mornings people didn't wake up. Some nights people didn't return from inspection. In the absence of funerals, the living did the remembering. In that darkness, Éva guarded small flames. A melody recalled from before the war hummed under the breath. A story about her sister's laugh told quietly to a bunkmate who couldn't sleep. A vow repeated like prayer. If I survive, I will not let them finish the erasure they began. Each day survived was a mathematical miracle. Each breath was a refusal. Hope was not something she felt. It was something she did. In 1945, the front lines moved like weather, and then one morning, the storm was gone. Liberation did not come as a parade. It came as a confusion of languages, a sudden space where orders had been, a gate that stood open, daring you to believe it. Éva was free, but freedom arrived inside a body that had been starved and a mind that had been taught to expect the worst. She weighed little more than skin and bone and memory. She turned toward home anyway. Debrecen was not waiting with open arms. The buildings were there. The addresses had not changed. The sky was where she left it. But her parents were not behind the door. Her sister was not at the window. Silence, which had once been a gentle sound at night, now spread through the rooms like fog. There were forms to file, lists to check, rumors to chase. Every day began with the same impossible question: who else is alive? Most days ended with the same answer: you can learn to sleep in a barrack. It is harder to learn to sleep in your own bed when the people who taught you how to sleep are gone. After the war, the world wanted to rebuild. Factories, bridges, governments, and myths that made sense of the rubble. Survivors were asked to move on at a pace that ignored physics. Éva tried to live an ordinary life, because what else do you do? She worked, she found ways to eat, she learned how to walk down a street without flinching at every sound. She laughed sometimes and startled herself when she did. She grew older, and she did not speak. Some stories are too heavy to carry in public. Some memories seem to ask for silence as their only respectful container. And there is this too. Telling your story risks reliving it. Years turned into decades. The world moved through headlines and anniversaries. Documentaries were made. Speeches were given. But inside, Éva lived a private museum, and most of its rooms remained closed. Then time, the same force that had threatened to erase her, began erasing the witnesses. The roll call of the living grew shorter. The silence started to feel like an accomplice. Éva decided to open the doors of that museum. She began to write, first notes, then pages, then a careful memoir that stitched detail to detail until memory became a map. She spoke at schools where faces were the age she had been when the war arrived. She answered questions as gently as possible and as truthfully as necessary. She learned that voice is not the opposite of silence. It is what silence protects until you are ready. She stood behind podiums and felt her hands tremble less each time. She saw eyes widen not from shock. There is too much shock in the world, but from recognition. This happened to someone like me, and that means remembering is something I must do. Still, there was a gap she could feel even if she couldn't name it. Words were brave. Words were necessary. But the body had its own archive, and it had not yet been consulted. In her 90s, Éva did something that defied every expectation except her own. She agreed to collaborate on a theater dance project that would place her body, the very body that had been starved, shorn, numbered, and ordered, at the center of a living artwork. Rehearsals did not begin with leaps. They began with listening. A choreographer asked questions. A young dancer watched how Éva breathed when she remembered. The goal wasn't to perform the past. The goal was to let the past move through a present that could finally hold it. On stage, Éva did not pretend to be young. She did not disguise her age or ask for mercy from it. She lifted her arms. She turned a shoulder. She walked in a slow circle that felt like a homecoming. Beside her, a younger partner mirrored and supported, amplifying small gestures into sentences the audience could read. There were no sets that looked like camps, no costumes that tried to replicate the unspeakable. The piece refused reproduction and chose revelation. A hand opening, that was arrival and loss. A head bowed, that was the count of the missing. Two bodies leaning into the same invisible wind, that was the long after. People cried in silence because the performance asked for listening more than applause. When it ended, something rare happened in a theater. The audience did not rush to leave. They stayed, as if movement had turned memory into a room they were reluctant to exit. For Éva, the stage was not therapy. It was testimony in 3 dimensions. To move, it was to insist that a survivor's body is not only a site of injury, but also a site of meaning. To dance was to make a grammar of hope out of bones that had known hunger. And here is the truth of the piece taught without ever saying aloud. When memory lives only in words, forgetting waits for silence. When memory lives in the body, forgetting has to wrestle with breath. Éva lived to 97. She died in September 2023, after spending her last years doing something the architects of her destruction could never have imagined, choosing the terms of her own remembrance. Her legacy is not only what she endured, but what she authored from that endurance. She left behind pages that refuse euphemism, conversations that turned classrooms into sanctuaries, and a performance that made audiences feel the edges of history with their eyes and their lungs. She taught that remembrance is not a mood, it is a practice. You do it with sentences and with steps, with anniversaries, and with the way you pause before repeating a rumor, with the care you take to call people by their names. When asked why she kept speaking, Éva would answer with a clarity that sounded like a bell, because silence can be useful to the wrong people. Memory is not the opposite of joy, she showed us. Memory is where joy learns to share a world with truth. And so, the final image is simple. A stage, a light, an elderly woman raising her arms, not to surrender, never again to surrender, but to begin. If this story moved you, let it keep moving. Share it. Talk about it at your table. Teach it to someone younger than you. Subscribe to Voices from the Camps and help keep the record living, not just intact. As long as there is breath, there is a way to remember. As long as there is memory, there is a way to resist. And as long as someone like Éva can lift her arms, the world cannot pretend it didn't see.